Novel Transcript, A Poor Man's Truce, by H.E. Scott. Chapter 1. Huddled on the floor of a dingy room, his back pressed tightly against the wall, a filthy, bedraggled man wrapped his arms tightly around his knees. Raising a shaking hand, he pushed a strand of greasy hair off his face. On the other side of the room, a woman and two men sat hunched at a grimy table, impatience etched on their faces. The woman, holding a sachet filled with aromatic spices to her pinched nostrils, to mask the noxious odor of the room, stared malevolently down at the man sitting on the floor. Fidgeting uneasily, he avoided her gaze and looked intently at the men's boots, rich leather, men of their status never associated with the lower classes, especially one of the nameless men, a gong farmer. Gong farmers spent their lives underground, cleaning the sewers. The man huddled on the floor, fearfully eyeing the assembled group, was one of them, a gong farmer. "The first stage has gone well, master," mumbled the greasy-haired man, his voice quivering as he spoke. As a gong farmer, he was well acquainted with the city's sewers and underground tunnels. For that knowledge alone, they chose the skinny gong farmer to bring banned weapons into the castle under the noses of the castle guards. "You keep your opinions to yourself," snarled the larger of the two men. "You had a simple task, to bring all the swords here, not leave one out in the open." The grimy man glanced at a leather sack, crusted with wet sand, the hilts of 5 swords poking out. "But, master, I have taken care of the problem. No one will find it, or the corpse," his voice sounding high-pitched and fearful. "I have hidden them well. There will be nothing recognizable. The crawlers—" "Be silent," roared the older man, banging his fist hard onto the table, causing the gong farmer to jerk his head back in shock, bumping it on the wall. Nervously, the filthy gong farmer edged his way closer to the door, his thoughts turning to the events of the previous evening. The leather sack with the swords had split open as he dragged it across the beach. One gleaming hilt protruded out of the sack. Temptation proved too great. He pulled it from the sack and out of its scabbard. He swung the blade back and forth and imagined himself brandishing the blade in a fight. How could he have known a soldier coming from the castle watched him? He buried the sword and the body, hiding all traces of blood from the soldier's deadly wounds. Just thinking of the dead weight and staring eyes of the corpse as he pushed it into the hole made his stomach churn and brought him back to the present. Fear visibly shook his body. Fear of Master Gerard, not because of the dead man, but the lost weapon. Nervously, he wiped his dirty sleeve across his mouth, leaving a smear of grime across his cheek. Just then, another man entered the room, leaving the door ajar. The gong farmer slipped through the opening, disappearing down the dark tunnels, mistaken in his belief that he went unnoticed. "Find the vermin," said Gerard, the larger of the two men, giving a nod to the new arrival. The man put his hand to his chest in salute, then silently exited the room. Jacques, the filthy gong farmer, ran as fast as he could down a short tunnel, then through a door into the sewers, a place he had called home all his life. He knew the sewers well. He required no torch to see where he was going. He ran when he could, on the small ledge bordering each side of the rank tunnel. At times he had to walk in the sewer's foul contents. The screech of rusty metal hinges told him someone pursued him. Jacques glanced back over his shoulder and saw the flare of a torch. Sweat ran cold down his back, chilling him. He could hear the footsteps of his pursuer faintly in the distance. He knew he had no choice but to go on before his pursuer caught him. Coming to a fork in the tunnel, he stopped again to listen and heard the footsteps, 1, 2, 3, then they stopped. He knew the man was closing in, or perhaps it was the woman pursuing him. Jacques didn't know why she was at the meeting with Gerard. He only knew she frightened him more than the men did. She wore a scowl on her face that seemed etched there permanently. Whoever pursued him, he could not afford to wait and find out. The next tunnel turned back and angled away towards the castle. He hurried down that tunnel where he knew it ended at a small barred gate. Not too far from where the tunnels separated, a ladder hung in the small alcove on his left side. If only he could reach it before his pursuer caught up to him. Jacques dragged his fingers along the slimy wall to feel for the alcove and the ladder, his only way of escape. Finally, his hand slipped into empty space. Almost giddy with relief, he climbed the rusty ladder, trusting it would bear his weight. He could hear the splashing footsteps of his pursuer, running now to catch up. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. Frightened, Jacques held his breath, certain his breathing and maybe even the pounding of his heart would reveal his presence, clinging halfway up the rusty ladder. The man stopped for only a moment, and then his splashing footsteps drew away into the blackness of the tunnel. Jacques took a shuddering breath. He did not have much time. The tunnel below ended maybe 50 feet further. When the footsteps grew fainter, he climbed the rest of the way up the slimy ladder, but slipped and smashed his nose on a rung. His eyes watered with pain. He wanted to scream. Regaining his hold, he fumbled for the latch on the trapdoor above. Standing motionless, he listened for movement in the tunnel below. Hearing nothing, he pulled on the latch, praying to the goddess for help. He yanked again and again, but the latch was seized from years of disuse. Frantically, he wriggled it back and forth, and finally it slid with a loud, rasping noise, just as he heard the echoing steps of his pursuer's return. He flung the hatch open and slid his smelly, slime-covered body through. At the same moment, a knife flew through the opening, clanging against a wall. Jacques slammed the trapdoor shut and fell upon it, banging his knees in the process. The person on the other side of the trapdoor pushed and pushed, but the frightened gong farmer stayed firm. When his pursuer finally gave up, Jacques remained there, collapsed from exhaustion, wishing that somehow he could escape this wretched life and live without fear, if only for a short time. Jacques did not doubt that his pursuer went away to get help, and it wouldn't take long for them to return. His fate loomed very near. Even his full weight on the door would not be enough to keep it closed. Recognizing the room as one of the gong rooms where he removed night soil and carried it to the fields, he searched for a small door leading into the tunnels and temporary safety by again dragging his fingers along the wall. Sighing in relief when he found the door, he opened it a crack and peeked out. Seeing no one working nearby, he exited the room and found a shovel to wedge the door shut. At least, no one could follow him from that direction. Safe for the moment, he leaned against the wall and slowly slid down until he sat on the cold stone floor. His legs quivered, and he didn't think he had the strength to stand again. As his pounding heart slowed, and he could stand without shaking, he stealthily crept through the lower passageways of the castle in search of somewhere to hide. He needed to rest, to think how he could get himself out of this mess. Despair formed as a cold ball in his stomach as he crept along the passage. He could not go back to his hovel. He had nowhere to go. He was homeless.